where hinges creak in doorless chambers, and strange and frightening sounds echo through the halls, whenever candlelights flicker, and the air is deathly still. That is the time when ghosts are present, practicing their terror with ghoulish delight.
Welcome, foolish mortals, to another Halloween special on Forgotten Media, where I dig up some stuff beyond the grave. And what better way to celebrate this year's Halloween by returning to Disney's Haunted Mansion, especially since the ride celebrated its 50th anniversary.
Out of all the rides in Disney parks, Haunted Mansion is the most popular when it comes to its history, and it's even spawned some spooky tales from people's different experiences of riding or working in the mansion. But outside of the animatronics and special effects, one of the reasons why the mansion is so popular is because of the lore. A mansion made for ghosts to live in. Madame Leota, the hitchhiking ghost, the singing bus, the infamous Hatbox Ghost, the organist, all these spirits are full of character with their own ghoulish charm. But how did they all get there? What were these spirits like in human form before they died? Who was Master Gracey? Where did the mansion come from? All these questions are always left unanswered. There really isn't any official canon storyline to the mansion and the ghosts, and any official media that has come out related to the mansion is always different. But that's what makes the lore of Disney's Haunted Mansion so interesting and fun. It's always open to different interpretations where anyone can come up with their own theories and ideas about these spirits and the backstories they once had.
So for this episode, I'm going to be covering what is probably the first official media to give any of these spirits some backstory, and that is the Disney Haunted Mansion comics, the very first ones in fact. Yeah, I briefly mentioned this in my Haunted Mansion video game episode, but hey, now I have it, and luckily it didn't cost me an arm and a leg to get the complete series.
These Disney Haunted Mansion comics began their run on October of 2005, and were made by Slave Labor Graphics, an independent comic company that usually dabbles in the dark comedy. Of course, this isn't the first time they've made stories for Disney, because around that time they also made comics for Tron, taking place several years after the first movie, a continuation of Alice in Wonderland, a continuation of the TV series Gargoyles, and of course, The Haunted Mansion. But unlike those other comics that have an ongoing story arc, The Haunted Mansion is, for the most part, an anthology series, telling these different stories of how certain ghosts like the hitchhiking ghost, the opera singer, and even the people that appear in the stretching room, as well as the pet cemetery, have their own stories of what they were in life and how they died. But there's also some original stories too, such as a fearless adventurer who hunts creatures for his trophy room and plans on hunting a ghost to complete his collection. And he kinda creeps me out. Almost looks like something out of Invader Zim. There's also a story about a werewolf, or a loup-garou. Yeah, there's a werewolf who was once a slave to the devil, who tried to escape from his master, only for him to be trapped near the mansion and never be free. And other times there are some stories that feel like a typical day at the Haunted Mansion, like the caretaker and his dog dealing with the dead. Sure, he's not the bravest souls to deal with these kind of jobs, but to him, it's all worth it just so he can see his deceased wife whenever he goes on his dinner breaks. Then there's the pretty humorous stories, like the beheaded knight who has a crush on Madame Leota and tries to tell her that he loves her, but Leota doesn't quite get it as she's too delusional about conjuring spirits and doesn't even know that she is a spirit trapped in a crystal ball.
If there's one thing that the series has when it comes to consistency, it's the color, as every page was printed in black and white. The art style is varied, and you won't be seeing the same artist in every issue, so it's quite interesting. It kind of reminds me of Fleetway Sonic the comic and how varied the artwork was for that series. As for this 7-issue series, there's surprisingly a lot of stories in this anthology series. So rather than just listing every story that happens, no matter how long or short they are, instead I'm just going to highlight some of my personal favorites in no particular order.
Blueprint for Murder. Master Gracey hires Mr. Coates and Mr. Davis to build his mansion full of trapdoors and other weird things. Mr. Coates becomes jealous of his partner and plans to do away with him and get the reward for himself. But unbeknownst to him, Mr. Davis is already one step ahead. In some ways, I like to think of this as a comic inspired by the whole Claude Coates versus Mark Davis during the mansion's construction. One side wanted a more dark, scary ride, and the other one wanted a more lighthearted one with gags. I like this story. It pretty much shows off the first permanent residence of the Haunted Mansion, the groundskeeper's secret. As I mentioned before, this is a short story of the daily routine for the groundskeeper and his dog, and ending with having dinner with his deceased wife. The one neat thing about this story is that all the dialogue is sung to the song A Grim Grinning Ghost, and sung by the singing bus, obviously. So yeah, fun story. The Woman in Black. This story is told by the driver of the hearse with the ghost horse. He tells the tale of when he had an encounter with a mysterious woman in a black dress, and that soon led him to the haunted mansion. It has some spooks and comedy, but it does end with a heartwarming ending when the boy stands up for himself and helps the woman in black. The Peppermint Girl. Two teenagers observe a party going on in the mansion's ballroom, and they fall in love with a lonely gal who forever sits by herself watching the party go on. The only way for her to join the dance is to have a partner, so these two teens go out of their way to fight each other on who's gonna commit suicide first so that they can have a dance with this gal. This definitely has a lot of dark humor with all the ways these guys try to kill themselves, while ending on a plot twist. I also found this scene to be pretty funny. It feels like ages since I have been touched. I promise, somehow, some way, I'll find a way to touch you. Help you. We both will. The two stories based around the pet cemetery, mainly focusing on the dog Fifi. In When the Fifi is Away, Fifi desperately wants to be reunited with his owner, the bride in the attic, and finds a way to become alive again. But it doesn't last long. And in Night of the Ghost Fleas, Fifi gets attacked by ghost fleas. Yeah, that's a thing in the comic. I find these stories to be pretty amusing. They're the more comedic stories in the series. And finally, the backstories to the hitchhiking ghosts. The Big Nap tells the tale of Gus, once a shepherd tending to his noisy sheep, and all he wanted was to sleep in peace and quiet. In Laugh, I Thought I'd Die. Ezra is a practical jokester who soon finds himself where the joke's on him. And The Doctor Is In tells the tale of Phineas, being a traveling salesman selling fake medicine, who soon finds himself dealing with more than live patients. These stories have no dialogue and are just images. But if you want something a little more simple, I recommend checking these out. Nice little cartoon artwork there.
Now, even though this is an anthology series that has a collection of short stories that kind of focus on their own little universe, there is one ongoing story arc focusing on Master Gracey, the supposed owner of the mansion. This 6-part story arc was featured in almost every issue, and it also features a few other stories that tie into this, and it's quite interesting.
The Mystery of the Mance tells the story of how Master Gracey was once a notorious pirate by the name of Captain Blood, who took on the name after killing his former captain and stuffing his decapitated head in a hat box. During those days, he enjoyed himself, smuggling goods, stealing treasures, and it even mentions having several encounters with another notorious pirate, Jean Lafitte. I'm sure offhand Disney will enjoy reading this comic. But his pirating days came to an end, and so he took back his old name and quietly slipped away to New Orleans while the French boarded his ship and killed his crew. He acquires an old abandoned mansion and finds out that it's haunted. But it's no problem for him. A former pirate living in a haunted mansion seems like the perfect place to not be bothered. That is until he falls in love with a woman named Emily DeClaire and wants to marry her. But first he needs to find a way to get rid of the spirits in his mansion. He is soon greeted by a medium by the name of Leota and promises to help get rid of the spirits, as well as to make him more happy with some personal attention. But Gracey refuses this and tells her to just get rid of the ghosts, which she does, or so he thinks. On the wedding day, Emily looks through the attic for something, only for her to come face to face with the ghost of Gracey's former captain. This was all part of Leota's plan, as she first discovered that the spirits in the mansion are Gracey's pirate crew, and decides to summon them and ruin Gracey's wedding by scaring Emily to death and frightening away all the guests. Well, there's one thing to learn from this story. Don't mess with Leota when she offers you personal attention, I guess. Outraged by this betrayal, Gracey finds Leota and proceeds to strangle her to death. With his chances to start over and live a new life destroyed, Gracey proceeds to end his own life by hanging himself from the rafters, becoming the dangling corpse seen in the stretching room. But even in death, Leota transferred her spirit inside a crystal ball, where she continues her chants, and thus making the mansion a home for the deceased. Then in the story The Interview, it takes place years later where a girl by the name of Sarah arrives at the mansion for a job interview for housekeeping, only to find out that she's already dead after she frantically drove to the mansion and crashed her car. But her time at the mansion is cut short after being rescued by some paramedics. So you'd think she'd be traumatized and slowly recovering from this near-death experience, right? Nope! Instead, she becomes obsessed with living in the mansion, even if it means ending her life for good. Her boyfriend Steve tries to talk some sense into her, but she refuses. So she drives back to the mansion while Steve gets there first and tries to find her inside the mansion. Sarah comes across the groundskeeper and his dog, who tells her of his time at the mansion, his deceased wife, and convinces Sarah that there is someone out there that's worth living for. But even after all that, Steve dies of fright inside the mansion from all the ghosts and becoming number 1000. Yeah, the writer's always talking about how it has 999 happy haunts and there's always room for one more. So, what would happen if it did reach 1000? Well, in this story, the mansion and all of the spirits disappear, leading into the next chapter, Demise of the Manse. Sarah plans to save Steve somehow, and as for the mansion, it's currently traveling through some kind of vortex. Master Gracey and Madame Leota reverted back to their human forms, and Leota reveals that this was all part of her plan as revenge for Gracey killing her. Once the mansion had reached 1000 ghosts, then Master Gracey and all who lived in the mansion would suffer everlasting damnation. So in other words, she managed to open a portal to hell. And what would happen next? Who knows? After issue 7 came out, that was the end of the Haunted Mansion comics by Slave Labor Graphics. My only source of info was from a Haunted Mansion wiki where one of the staff members at Slave Labor Graphics said that Disney didn't approve of the planned 8th issue, and that their licensing agreement had expired. Other than that, I can't find any more info as to why these comics were cancelled, which is a shame for an anthology series to end like this, especially when you have one ongoing story arc that ended on a cliffhanger. As mentioned before, there was an 8th issue planned, but it was never released. I'm sure we would have gotten Demise of the Manse Part 2, but not much is known for what other stories it could have had. Years later, some unreleased stories of the comics were revealed on the internet, the Phineas story, and another one involving the organist in the ballroom telling his story of how he got his spirits in the organ, by haunting a bus full of noisy choir kids and scaring a laughing choir director into driving a bus off of a cliff. Seriously, that's all that guy does is just laugh and having that creepy face. The story with the organist can be found on boingboing.net, while the Phineas story can be found on John Hashting's official DeviantArt page.
Nowadays, the comics have become hard to find, and as far as I know, there hasn't been any official reprints or official digital releases, so it can be a struggle to try and find all 7 of these comics. But thankfully, there is an alternative, thanks to this lovely book called Haunted Mansion Volume 1. Welcome, foolish mortals.
This is a neat book that combines the comics into one. The stories are rearranged so that it starts off with the Anthology series with all the different stories in their own universes, then it goes into the Master Gracey story arc, and then the 3-part interview story. I love the design of the book. The front has this special coat of arms for Master Gracey, the number 999 is on the back, the pages are designed to look all jagged like an old dusty book, and it comes with a free bookmark, which is neat. So yeah, it's nice to see all these comics combined into one book. Except the last one, you still gotta get that separately.
These are not cheap. I had to shell out like $50 each just to get the entire series together. Which is a real shame that there never was a Volume 2 containing issue 7 and some of the unreleased stories. But then again, I've heard some rumors saying that there is a Volume 2, and I'm sure they had planned it out, but it's most likely cancelled.
But anyway, the Haunted Mansion comics made by Slave Labor Graphics are very nice. It's interesting how they decided to divide the stories into 2 categories, the Anthology series and the Master Gracey story arc, along with the 3-part interview story, being tied in as well thanks to Demise of the Manse Part 1. But then again, that chapter was never completed, so you could count the interview as its own thing, or just a very long story in the Anthology series. I think it was a great idea to make it an anthology series, letting the certain ghosts have their time to shine. The Master Gracey story arc is very interesting, as well as with how they portray the character, starting off as a pirate, then wanting to start a new life with his bride, and it all comes crashing down when his past literally comes back to haunt him. It's actually quite similar to a very early idea for the ride involving a former pirate killing his bride for finding out his secret past, then proceeds to take his own life after being haunted by the death of his bride. So that was the end of Slave Labor Graphics' take on the mansion, but we later got more Haunted Mansion comics thanks to Marvel. Although that was more of a 5-part miniseries focusing on a boy trying to find his grandfather inside the mansion and overcoming his fears. I thought it was okay. Then there's also Seekers of the Weird, which is pretty good, especially if you like the more bizarre stuff. This one is worth mentioning, as this is loosely based off of a segment of the ride that was never constructed called Museum of the Weird. I've also heard that IDW is planning on making a graphic novel full of their own stories based on the Haunted Mansion. I've heard it was supposed to come out in September, but now it looks like it's been pushed to August 2020, so hopefully we'll eventually get to see this book one day.
So in closing, the Disney Haunted Mansion comics made by Slave Labor Graphics are frightfully fun to read. If you're a fan of the ride, I recommend checking them out. If you can find them for a decent price, that is. Otherwise, best better save up on that money. Well, that wraps up this episode of Forgotten Media, so this is Melting Man 234 signing out, and wishing everyone a happy and safe Halloween. I'll see you all a little later.